What if I told you that one of the greatest men who ever walked with Jesus was also one of the biggest failures in the entire Bible? Not just a small mistake, not just a little slip-up. We're talking about a man who looked Jesus in the eye and said, "I will never leave you." And then, just a few hours later, stood in the cold dark and said, "I don't even know who he is." That man is Peter, and his story is not just about courage and faith. It is also about pride, fear, and the kind of failure that makes you want to hide forever. But here is the part that will surprise you. God was not done with him. Before we go any further, if you are new here, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We share stories like this every week, stories from the Bible that will make you think, make you feel, and help you see yourself in a whole new way. Now let's get into it. Peter's real name was Simon. He was a fisherman. Rough hands, strong arms, the kind of man who smelled like the sea every single day of his life. He was not trained in religion. He had not studied the scriptures in fancy schools. He was just a regular man doing regular work. Then one day, Jesus walked by the shore of the Sea of Galilee and said two simple words, "Follow me." And Simon, this fisherman who had probably heard teachers and preachers before, dropped his nets and walked away. Just like that. There was something about Jesus that was different. Something that made a working man leave everything behind without even asking where they were going first. From that moment on, Jesus gave Simon a new name. He called him Peter, which means the rock. And that name came with a promise. Jesus looked at him and said, "On this rock, I will build my church." Can you imagine hearing that? You are a fisherman. You have fish on your hands and mud on your sandals. And the man everyone is talking about looks at you and says, "You're going to be the foundation of something that will last forever." Peter must have stood up a little taller that day. And honestly, there were moments where he earned that name. One night, the disciples were in a boat on the water. A storm came out of nowhere. The waves were crashing, the wind was howling, and these grown men who worked on the water for a living, were terrified. Then they saw something moving on the water toward them. They thought it was a ghost. But Jesus called out to them, "Do not be afraid. It is me." And Peter, only Peter, said something wild. He said, "Lord, if it really is you, tell me to come to you on the water." Think about that for a second. Everyone else in the boat held on for dear life. Peter said, "Let me out." Jesus said, "Come." And Peter stepped over the edge of the boat and walked on water. He actually walked on water. That is the Peter people remember. Bold, brave, the man who jumped out of the boat when everyone else stayed inside. But something happened. Peter looked down. He felt the wind. He saw the waves beneath his feet, and the fear crept in, and he started to sink. "Lord, save me," he cried. And Jesus caught him immediately. He did not let him drown, but he did ask him something that must have stung. "Why did you doubt?" That pattern followed Peter everywhere. He was the first disciple to say out loud that Jesus was the Son of God. Jesus said it was a revelation from heaven itself. Peter got it right when others were still guessing. But then, almost in the same breath, when Jesus started talking about dying, Peter pulled him aside and said, "No, Lord, this will never happen to you." He thought he was protecting Jesus. He thought he knew better. And Jesus turned to him and said something so sharp it must have felt like a knife. He said, "Get behind me, Satan." Not because Peter was evil, but because Peter was thinking like a man instead of trusting like a follower. That is the tension in Peter's life. Moments of stunning faith right next to moments of stunning stubbornness. And then came the night everything fell apart. Jesus and the disciples were gathered for what we now call the Last Supper. The mood was heavy. Jesus said something that silenced the room. He said, "One of you will betray me tonight." Everyone looked around. But then Jesus said something else. He looked at Peter and said, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter would not hear it. Even if everyone else runs, he said, "I will never deny you. I am ready to go to prison for you. I am ready to die for you." Peter meant every single word. The problem was he did not know himself as well as he thought he did. Later that night, soldiers came to arrest Jesus. Peter grabbed a sword and cut off a servant's ear. He was ready to fight the whole crowd alone. That is how serious he was. But Jesus stopped him. He healed a man's ear and let himself be arrested. And the disciples scattered. They all ran. But Peter followed at a distance. He could not fully leave. He loved Jesus too much to walk away completely. So he slipped into the courtyard of the high priest, where Jesus was being questioned inside. He stood there by a fire, warming his hands in the cold night air. And then a servant girl looked at him and said, "You were with him. You're one of his followers." Peter felt his chest tighten. "No," he said. "I don't know what you're talking about." A little while later, someone else said the same thing. "You are one of them." "I am not," Peter said again. Then a third person stepped up. "You must be one of his disciples. Your accent gives you away. You are from Galilee, same as him." And Peter lost it. He started swearing and shouting. "I do not know the man." The moment the words left his mouth, a rooster crowed. And from across the courtyard, through the chaos and the firelight, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. Just looked at him. No words. Just a look. And Peter remembered. He remembered what Jesus had said at dinner. He remembered his own bold promise. He remembered the boat and the water and all the times Jesus had believed in him even when he got things wrong. He walked outside, and he wept bitterly. That is one of the most painful sentences in the entire Bible. He wept bitterly. For 3 days, Peter carried that weight. Jesus was crucified. He was buried. And Peter sat somewhere in Jerusalem with the memory of that look burned into his mind. What do you do with a failure that big? How do you come back from something like that? Most people would have given up. Most people would have decided that they had disqualified themselves, that they had gone too far, that the damage was too great to repair. But then the news came. The tomb was empty. Peter ran. In fact, the Bible says he ran faster than John to get there. And he went inside. He saw the folded cloth where Jesus had been lying. And he stood there, amazed, trying to understand what he was looking at. Jesus was alive. And do you know one of the first things the angel at the tomb said to the women who came to see Jesus? The angel said, "Go and tell the disciples and Peter." And Peter, out of all the people to name specifically, the messenger from heaven said Peter's name, as if to make sure no one forgot him, as if to say especially that one. You need to hear this. Jesus was not done with Peter, not even close. A few days later, Peter and some of the disciples went back to what they knew. They went fishing. They caught nothing all night. In the morning, a figure stood on the shore and called out, "Cast your net on the other side." They did, and the net was so full they could barely pull in. John looked at Peter and said, "It is the Lord." And Peter, the same man who had denied Jesus in fear and shame, jumped into the water and swam to shore. He did not wait for the boat. He could not wait. When he got there, Jesus had already made a fire. There was fish cooking, bread. Jesus said, "Come and have breakfast." And there, by a fire on the beach, just like the fire in the courtyard where everything had gone wrong, Jesus asked Peter a question. 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" Once for every denial. And 3 times Peter said, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." And 3 times Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Not punishment, not shame, not a long lecture about all the ways Peter had failed. Just a restoration, a recommission, a second chance that tasted like breakfast by the sea. Peter went on to preach one sermon on the day of Pentecost that brought 3,000 people to faith in a single day. He became a pillar of the early church, just like Jesus said he would. He healed the sick. He stood before kings. He wrote letters that we still read today. The Rock. And he earned that name, not because he was perfect, but because he got back up every single time. Here is what the story of Peter teaches us. God does not choose perfect people. He chooses people who are willing to keep going even after they have fallen. Peter failed loudly and publicly. He did it in front of other people. He did it in the middle of the most important moment in human history. And he still became one of the most important figures in the entire Christian faith. If Peter's failure did not disqualify him, yours does not disqualify you either. The look that Jesus gave Peter in that courtyard was not a look of disgust. It was a look of grief. The grief of someone who loves you deeply watching you hurt yourself. And that look did not end in the courtyard. It continued on the beach, in the breakfast, and the question asked 3 times. It continues still. Whatever you have done, whatever you have said, whatever fire you have been standing by when you should have been standing up, that is not the end of your story. It is just a chapter. And the next chapter begins the moment you decide to swim to shore. If this story moved something in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story. There is someone in your life who needs this right now. Be the one to send it to them. Until next time, keep going. The rooster has crowed, but morning always comes.